Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. On the show today, Yamaha have kicked off launch season and we're not even at the end of January 2023 yet. And there's already rider move rumours going around for 2024. It's bye-bye officially to front ride height devices. And could it be bye-bye to Aleix Espargaro, who has no interest in racing past 35 years old? He's nearly 34. We've got a bit of Pecco, a bit of Fabio chat too, and a whole lot more coming your way, as always, over the next hour or so. The recording date is Wednesday, the 18th of January. My name is Harry Benjamin. Joining me as ever is Crash's MotoGP editor, Pete McLaren, and of course, former Grand Prix rider and British champion, Keith Huewen. But before all of that, as much as we're looking forward to a brand new year and a brand new season, it's been a particularly sad week for everyone at Crash. Will, who is the big boss here at Crash, his brother David, who ran things over at Bike Sport News, sadly passed away last week after a battle with cancer for the last few years. He leaves behind his beautiful wife, Danielle, and 3 children, Leighton, Lawson, and Aria. And it goes without saying, us and the whole Crash team very much have David and his family in our thoughts.
It's kind of a worst case scenario for any family, isn't it? And when you consider the impact that Will Miller, David Miller at Bike Sport News, and of course their dad, now Sir Robin Miller, who was the man at EMAP, East Midlands Allied Press, which owned Motorcycle News all those years ago. They are quite a famous, infamous family within motorcycle journalism, if you like. And David had an opinion that he stuck by, and I really liked that. It wasn't the kind of journalism that's standard. It was hard hitting. It was controversial sometimes. And he had a huge sense of humour as well. You know, very, very funny, clever fella. Bike Sport News originally started, if you remember, by Chris Carter and Robert Fennell of Donington Park, who ended up owning it, and a partner in Dave Hardy. Anybody remember Dave Hardy as well? I don't know where on earth he is nowadays. But Bike Sport News then became available. David Miller picked it up and ran with it, turned it into a digital platform, as we all end up, and made a real success of it. But I think that he'll be remembered for his opinions, for his sense of humour, and for a man who was unwavering in pushing forward any story that he thought was going in the right direction. I think that we've had an unlucky month this month, really. I mean, Andrew Wheeler, another man, a photojournalist that many will be familiar with from MotoGP, a man larger than life. Unfortunately, he passed away as well in the last couple of weeks. You know, had an illness for some time, but another personality from the MotoGP paddock. So the year started off quite sad, really, hasn't it?
It really has, hasn't it? And of course, our thoughts, as I said, are with everybody, and obviously Will, our big boss as well, who oversees us, and really we wouldn't be here without Will. So all our thoughts, especially with him and his family too. But one thing we all had in common, I think, was talking about bikes, and in particular MotoGP. It's what they did, it's what they became synonymous with. So we shall do that as well. And it is a busy show over the next hour or so. And before we get into all things Yamaha launch, I just wanted to say that we have a bit of a new thing for 2023. Now, we love hearing from you. The guys don't know about this. We love hearing from you and seeing your questions. But would you like to be on the show with us? Would you like your voice to be here? Well, now is your chance. If you have a question that you want to ask the guys, you can send us a voice note with your questions. Keep it to about 30 seconds maximum. Tell us your name, where you're from as well, and email it to us, podcast@crash.net. Real complicated email address. podcast@crash.net. Send us a little voice note with your question, 30 seconds, and we shall play it out on the show, and the guys will answer it for you if you fancy that. So isn't that fun? Now, let's get straight into things with Yamaha. And Monster Yamaha, to give them their full name, have confirmed, well, they were the first MotoGP team to unveil its 2023 colours, with Fabio Quartararo and Franco Morbidelli taking the wraps off in Jakarta. Pete, come to you on this first. What's new on the bike? I mean, they've added a bit of this camouflage look to the livery, but I mean, you've got to squint to see it.
Exactly, and you use the right words there, Harry. We're taking the wraps off. I mean, this is just the presentation of the livery. The bike that you saw is not the 2023 race bike. You know, we won't see that until testing starts next month in Sepang. So this is really as you say, this is just the look of the bike. And that will be the same for all of these presentations that come up now from the factories, because they don't want to give away what they're planning, especially in this aerodynamic era where you can learn quite a lot just from looking at a bike. They're not going to give that away at a launch when you've still got this, a couple of months before the start of the season, isn't it? End of March. So they're going to keep what they've got planned under wraps. And this is just really, this is what the bike is going to look like. And as you say, there's a bit of a camouflage touch to it. And, I think they've got rid of a bit of red at the bottom of the fairing. But yeah, this is a presentation. It's a chance. Indonesia is the biggest Yamaha market. So it's a chance to go there, get some coverage for the launch and everything else before they go to Sepang and get serious. So yeah, unfortunately, there was no press conferences or anything at this. So it really was just an unveiling. It wasn't really a launch as such. So we didn't get to hear about, have they found out what happened with the engine at Valencia? Have they fixed that? We did hear from Sumi, the head of Yamaha Motor Racing, that engine is the top priority still, but we're not going to know if that's actually, or the level of success they've had until we see the top speed charts at Sepang. So yeah, a lot of unanswered questions. Obviously, Fabio was there with Frankie. We got to hear an update on Fabio's condition with his hand. He fell off his motocross bike. I think it was about the 10th, 12th of December, and fractured his left hand again, the same hand that he damaged at Sepang in the Malaysian Grand Prix. So he actually said he hasn't been on the bike. So he's had some, he's just been in cardio training, that kind of thing. But he's been off a bike for quite a long time. Hopes to be back on it soon. But other than that, it was, the usual things. Everyone's optimistic at this time of year, aren't they? Everyone wants to do well and win the World Championship, of course. They also spoke a bit about the sprint races and the changes that will bring. Fabio, quite interesting in saying that the loss of free practice 4, this chance to work on the bikes before the race at the same time as the race, that going out the window, what's that going to mean? It's going to be really intense now. A lot of poring over data after the sprint race on Saturday to get the bike ready for Sunday, and all these sort of changes. If you get injured, you'll lose 37 points if you miss a race weekend now. The 12 for the sprint race and the 25 potentially for the Sunday race instead of just the 25. So, consistency, avoiding injuries, all these things are playing out. It's going to be interesting, isn't it? I mean, sprint races, they are only half points, but with 21 rounds, there's still 250 points. Well, Bagnaia won the title with, I think, about 260. Now, it was a low-scoring year, but, I mean, it does just show how important a fundamental change, potentially, to the championship these sprint races could be. So, all optimism at Yamaha at this stage, but we'll have to wait a few weeks to find out what goes on there. The next launch is Gresini with Ducati this weekend, so that's the next one on the agenda. But they follow in pretty quick-fire order now. There's the factory Ducati team next week, I think Pramac as well, Red Bull, KTM. A lot of them are going to get their liveries out in public before they're on track at Sepang in early February.
It all kicks off really at Sepang. The Shakedown test, which has already caused a whole load of grief as far as the journalists are concerned that have already paid to get out there for the Shakedown test, because IRTA, the SMNA, the Dorna, I think, have banned all journalists from the entire track. Can't get in at all for the Shakedown test, which is pretty poor shouting, really. I mean, Frine at the press office for Dorna, she's taken the brunt of some very unhappy journos that have already planned their trip out there because now they've got a week out that they didn't need to spend. They could have spent it at home with their families or whatever they might have done. So a little bit of unhappiness already in the media department regarding that. I think that we've got a few things coming up this year. I mean, we've got World Superbike. I'm sorry to bring World Superbike up in MotoGP, but I think it's really relevant. All of the riders, as far as I'm aware, in World Superbike are up for contract at the end of this year, apart from Jonathan Ray and maybe Bautista, I think, perhaps. But most of the World Superbike guys are back up for contract. We've heard that Aleix Espargaro doesn't want to race beyond 35 years old, so maybe he's going to be out. There's the possibility of being a bit of turnover coming towards the end of this year when contracts start to come back up again. And you've got the fact that World Superbike is rising in popularity massively around the world at the minute, a bit like it used to be in the 80s, where World Superbike was ahead of MotoGP in many marketplaces around the world. Are we going to see that again this year? Is World Superbike going to be making a bit of a comeback and be one of the most popular? I mean, Dorna will be keeping an eye on it. They own both series at the end of the day. Pete, you alluded to it. You used the word intense. Absolutely. The intensity of this year for MotoGP teams, personnel and riders is going to be massive. Extra race, obviously, on a Saturday. Different strategy for a sprint race and everything else. Loss of that free practice 4. That's massive. That was the one session, the half an hour session during the weekend, where I won't say they could relax, but it gave them an opportunity to just try that last few tweaks to try and get it working with a full tank of fuel. Remember, you had an opportunity to put it in race trim for that particular time. There's not that anymore. We used to say you go qualifying for qualifying. Free practice was qualifying to get into the right qualifying session, not qualifying 1 or qualifying 2. You wanted to be obviously in the right qualifying session that gave you the opportunity to fight for the front 4 rows of the grid. That is going to be even more intense this year. I can see, add a few injuries into this, and we have got a massively topsy-turvy year this year. Yamaha, are they going to be able to fix what they're going to be? The only, inline 4 that's going to be fighting amongst them all out there. Aprilia have got a motorbike that really is second at the moment to Ducati in performance. And if they manage to pull something out of the bag, they've got 4 bikes on the grid, so they're going to have all the data they need coming this year to try and work it through for their main riders. And the big deal for me, I'm just going to have to check this again, because the man that really shook everybody up, including Aleix, was Miguel Oliveira. I'm just taking a look at the Valencia test. First time he got out on it, he was right up there. Miguel Oliveira on the Aprilia could be the shock issue of 2023. And you're going to see a few, Yamaha, are they going to sort these Valencia problems out? Again, when you've got no time for engineering, they must be, you heard how unhappy Quartararo was. We've heard how unhappy Marc Marquez is with the way Honda are going, the direction that some of these guys are going in. There is no time. It comes back to that old issue, doesn't it? There's no time to make the kind of changes that you have to make a difference. You can fine tune, but nothing big in the engineering department for these guys if they're going to end up running what they brung come this year.
It's going to be fascinating, isn't it? But as Pete mentioned, the impact of the sprint races, you both said, it'll be 42 races technically, and the loss of stuff like FP4 and all brings a big effect. But I've also just been reading about the amount of crew chief changes. 12 riders are all getting a new crew chief. Mir, Rins, Nakagami, Bastianini, Gianantonio, Marquez, Vinales, Oliveira, Espargaro, Fernandez, Zarco, Raul Fernandez. Keith, what kind of impact does that have on a rider? I suppose, are you lucky if you could just click straight away, or is that a whole relationship that you have to build and focus on?
Well, it is a relationship that you build and focus on, but the trouble is it does get stale. At the end of the day, sometimes a change is as good as a rest. It's a very old-fashioned saying, but sometimes a new crew chief brings in new ideas. You've still got the information that you had from your old crew chief in your own head. From a rider perspective, what does that guy bring to the table? And with Suzuki disbanding, there are some bloody good guys that were suddenly available for the teams, and they've taken a real opportunity to turn this over. It's been a real turnover in the paddock for crew chief and technical specialists, and it's a very, very interesting year. They've had to increase, I would suggest, they've had to increase their personnel a little bit as well. Sprint race, you haven't got the time to concentrate on what you've got to disseminate. When you've got data that you're working through on a timescale that's so short during the course of racing weekend, sometimes you have to split your strategy slightly. You're going to have one main chief working on one particular strategy, and maybe somebody else backing that up with more information and more ideas as we move through the year. I'd be interested to see the books for this season, because this is going to cost teams a lot more money, to do what they're doing, in a time when money is tight. You've got 2 races of the weekend. You've got all the extra bits and pieces that you've got to do with that. But more than anything, you've got to chuck people at it to be able to disseminate all of that data and work out where you're going during the course of the weekend. Time costs money.
You mentioned Suzuki there, Keith. Of course, this other rumor that's going around is that Ken Kawachi might be on his way to Honda. I mean, wow. If that's the case, big move, very rare. That famous for the clipboard hug, isn't he? During all the sessions, whatever's on that clipboard will be making its way potentially over to HRC. I mean, very rare, isn't it, that top Japanese guys change manufacturers and. But I mean, what choice has he got, if you like? If he wants to stay involved in racing, Suzuki's not pulling out of MotoGP. They're pulling out of everything, aren't they? So really...
Yeah, Suzuki closed shop. Yeah. They even shut their Twitter feed and their media. Everything just suddenly came to an end, which is... It's got to be unprecedented. I cannot remember a time when a factory did that, ever.
Proper sad times.
There will be,
I shed a tear on that when you just see, I think it just says S or whatever, or Team S, and it's all just blank now, that their Twitter and Instagram. It's so upsetting. But I mean, clearly there's lots of, with more races, more personnel needed, bigger budgets, money's got to come from somewhere, I suppose, and lots of rumours already rife. And while we were on the subject of Yamaha early on, that was one of the big sort of rider rumours that are going on even now. You speak, we might get a whole sea change with lots of World Superbike riders up for grabs at the end of the year and MotoGP riders not performing, one of which is Franco Morbidelli. This is a make or break year for him, right? And already Jorge Martin has been touted to potentially go to Yamaha to replace him. But also Toprak Razgatlioglu, your man, Keith, also up there as well, could make the switch finally to MotoGP if Morbidelli fails to deliver again. Keith, who would you choose?
Well, I mean, Toprak, obviously, it will be interesting. I mean, I don't want to oversell Toprak Razgatlioglu. He's obviously brilliant. World Superbike, got a massively brilliant feel for a motorbike. In fact, anything, a scooter. I saw in an M3 BMW doing donuts the other day around a camera. The guy has just got so much oozing natural talent. But of course, that last 1% that you need to be a top MotoGP rider, we'll find out if he's got it. If he's got a good team around him. I mean, Kenan Sofuoglu, he's the 5 times World Supersports champ. He's his manager, and he's a tough cookie. Both of them Turks, and they are, pretty much focused on making sure Toprak gets the right ride. So somebody somewhere, such a lot to shake out this year. There really is such a lot to shake out. Toprak is obviously hanging around there waiting for it. Let's see the way World Superbike shapes up. I mean, Scott Smart, who, nephew of Barry Sheen, son of Paul Smart, brilliant, technically brilliant. I was going to say young man, he isn't so young anymore, but Scotty was the FIM technical director who's just got fired. The trouble is when you're forceful in your opinion and you're forceful in trying to make something work. Incidentally, great mates, best friends with David Miller, who we obviously introduced the show with. So Scott will be hurting at the moment as well. But they were great friends, and they were also very, very strong in their opinion of which way things should go and the way that things are. So you can understand why those two are such good mates. But Scott obviously smudged the wrong toe at some stage. But Scott has been responsible for the technical regs at World Superbike. Now, that's been quite controversial during the time because obviously not 500 revs off the Kawasaki, which Kawasaki definitely suffered from this last year. My question is, of course, is whether the new technical director will relax that a little bit and allow World Superbike to have a little bit more headroom as to what they can do for each manufacturer instead of kind of, what's the word I'm looking for, manipulating the overall control. Now, Scott also put together the rules for the future World Supersport series because obviously we've got different configurations of motorbike coming into World Supersport as well. So the guy that takes over from Scott Smart better be smart because there's a lot of work to do there. And so World Superbikes, it'll be interesting to see what bearing that has on anything during the course of the MotoGP year. A, it's going to be vying for popularity. B, it may be an alternative for MotoGP riders to drop to, or there might be a couple of gems that come up from World Superbike. It's unlikely because World Superbike riders haven't naturally done brilliantly well in MotoGP. Part of the reason might be that they're a bit longer in the tooth by the time they get across the other way. I mean, I've always argued that Jonathan Rea should have been given an opportunity properly. And the only couple of goes he had on a Repsol Honda, he did brilliant in my view, and he didn't bin the thing either, which you might have expected. Back at Aragon, I think it was a few years ago now, but he was young enough then to have come forward. Jonathan Rea will not move out of World Superbike now, not a chance of it, because obviously his age, his family, and his future. But Toprak is the right one. Whether there's any others that can come back from there, I don't know. But Toprak surely has got to be on shopping lists, surely in MotoGP.
It'd be a real shame not to see him on a MotoGP bike, wouldn't it? At some stage, we'd all be thinking, what if, and be discussing it for years to come. What might Toprak have done? So let's hope that he does get the chance. As you say, Harry, this factory seat at Yamaha, it's the only one, I think, that we know of. Let's say in public, there's always maybe options and clauses, isn't there, behind the scenes? But Morbidelli's is the only ride, in theory, that's up for grabs at the end of this year in a factory team. all the other places are signed up for 2 years. So there's obviously going to be a lot of people looking at that. And it's just a lot of it is going to come down to the bike again. If Yamaha make a big step with the engine, they can take their pick. There might be other guys that suddenly decide, you know what, that's the bike we want. On the other hand, if it struggles again, you might see, Jorge Martin, you mentioned him. He's obviously been sort of overlooked in favour of Bastianini. So he's probably been a bit stung by that and is, unsurprisingly thinking, well, maybe I've got to look around elsewhere. He's probably assumed he'd be, having been in Pramac, that he was going to take the next step to the factory team at Ducati. But now you've got 2 young guys there. I mean, in theory, Bagnaia and Bastianini, they could form that factory Ducati team lineup for years to come, couldn't they, age-wise? So maybe he's thinking, well, if I want to be a factory team rider, and we know that only factory team riders have won the MotoGP Championship so far, he's going to have to go elsewhere. Now, so a lot of it's going to depend on, though, how competitive is the Yamaha this year, because we know the Ducati's good. And the other option he's got is, make history. This is what he's saying at the moment, isn't it? By winning the championship with a satellite team, that would really put your name in the history book. So a lot of it's going to come down to how these bikes perform, as we've been saying, at the Sepang test and beyond the early rounds, because these decisions are going to be taken in the early stages for next year. And but that's the one that obviously people are focusing on. Pressure on Morbidelli. I mean, 19th in the World Championship last year, his worst ever season, below even his rookie year on a Mark VDS Honda. That can't continue from either side. From Morbidelli's side, he will not want to remain if that's going to just continue for his sake as well. So there's got to be some changes there in terms of the performance.
That's the pressure on a rider, but there's pressure on the manufacturers as well. KTM had a dog of a year last year, didn't work out at all with them. But it's going to be interesting to see whether birthday boy today, actually, Jack Miller, 28 years old today, whether he comes out of his corner fighting. I mean, Brad Binder and Jack Miller in the same team, that's pretty formidable. If KTM have actually made the changes they need to have made over the winter, they fell behind last year, that could be a formidable team. 28 for me, I've always said, 28 is the sweet spot from a rider's point of view. It's where that raw talent meets that bang-on maturity, the experience of racing at this level for this long, fitness-wise, mentally, all the things that you need to have. You're at your sharpest peak for me at 28 years old. That is the time where a motorcycle racer is in his best position. Raw talent, they've all got raw talent at this level. They've all got it. They're all fast. They're all brave. They all know what they got to do. But when that maturity reaches to temper it perfectly, some reach that point earlier. Quartararo is a good example of that. He'll take the points wherever he is. Even Marquez has got to that point quite early as well in his career, where he'd take the best he can. But I think Jack Miller, we're going to keep an eye on him. If KTM come up with the goods, I think Jack Miller is going to be a bit more of a force than we thought. And as I said, Miguel Oliveira in Aprilia, I think he is going to have a brilliant year. And he's in a satellite team. I don't think the difference between full factory and satellite is as great anymore. I think where it's going to be more difficult for satellite teams this year is because of the sprint race, because of their personnel. Satellite teams have notoriously less personnel. They don't have as many people as a factory team to service each and every one of the bikes and riders in the kind of intense program that they've got coming up this year. So I think that's where satellite teams might struggle a bit more. But having said that, satellite teams quite often are on a bike that maybe is a little older, which means they've got all the data already. They're not fighting against brand new data, brand new information that's coming in with the new motorbike. So when they've already got that default setting for each and every track, and I'll contradict myself again there, because we've got so many tracks that are coming this year that we've not been to before, and we haven't even covered that yet, that there's going to be brand spanking new data that they're going to have to get straight away. And maybe the satellite teams with that bank of data already will be in a better position on free practice one than some of the full factory new, brand spanking new, all new shiny, we've not tried it before motorbikes. We'll see.
We shall see. Well, look, let's dig into that. But just a quick word first from our lovely sponsor for this week's podcast. About you, but I'm sure Keith and Pete feel the same. But we're already thinking about holidays this year, as it is Blue January after all. So how do you fancy having something to look forward to in 2023 and planning your escape with Brittany Ferries? Whether you're a seasoned traveller or want to experience places like France and Spain for the first time, Brittany Ferries is the way forward, with space to relax and unwind in comfort. Vibrant and historical cities, breathtaking countryside, beautiful beaches, and so much more are all all waiting for you. And there is even more of a reason to get booking straight away, as Brittany Ferries have a limited time offer. You can book a flexi ticket for the same price as a standard ticket, amendable up until 4 hours before your outward sailing, and with a low deposit. Their flexi ticket means you can book with confidence, with the added security that your plans can change as and when you need them to. Offer ends 28th of February 2023, and for more information simply head to brittanyferries.com/bikers. So what are you waiting for? Book today and experience a richer way to travel with Brittany Ferries. So thank you very much to them. I can't wait for our trip, but I think we should do a little group cruise. Shall we do that?
I'll tell you what, it brings back happy memories. I remember the amount of boats that we used to have to travel on, obviously with the trucks and stuff like that, and with the fans traveling on the same ferries quite often across to France or wherever we were going, across to, over to Assen particularly, which is a favourite for the Brits. But one of the ones I used to like was the boat that used to take us to Sweden, because they had a disco. Haha, you don't get those very often nowadays.
Discotheque.
They have a club on board this thing, and everybody just gets completely destroyed, and it's very unprofessional but bloody good fun. And so happy memories of smelling diesel and beer. That's a ferry.
And if that doesn't sell it to you, I don't know what will. Well, yeah, brittanyferries.com/bikers. That's what you need. Right, let's carry on with the show then. So, I mean, we're sort of looking ahead to the year, aren't we? And there is a lot to sort of look forward to. But I'm wondering if I can narrow you down to sort of 3 things that you're each most looking forward to this year. What would they be?
Well, for me, Aprilia, I can't believe I'm saying that, because I think Aprilia dropped the ball a couple of years ago. They kept on promising that they were going to have a faster motor come the start of the year, and they never seemed to quite get there. And all of a sudden, they hired the Formula One guy in. He seemed to, and I remember thinking then, I'll tell you what, I'm a born cynic. I remember thinking, what? Really? It worked. So just goes to show you what the hell do I know. And their engineering, bearing in mind how small a factory they are, and what they'd taken on. I mean, it was sort of Herculean, really. I mean, Aprilia has a great reputation from a racing point of view, but it's, funding-wise, although it's owned by a massive group, it still will have had the budget for Aprilia as a brand. And I think in 2022, if they manage to keep that momentum going, Ducati have got to watch out. We'll see how much these changes, ride height adjustments, and all this, the slightly different rules, what that is going to do from a change perspective. But now that they've got 4 bikes on the grid, not just 2, and good guys on them, it's going to be a good year for Aprilia. I can see that coming. So that's one.
Pete, you have one now. Yeah,
I would say the Bastianini Bagnaia sort of contest, shall we say, at Ducati.
Dynamic.
Yes, I think, Ducati, we were mentioning Jack Miller, and he played a great team role, didn't he, at Ducati, in really supporting Bagnaia last season. That moment at Bury Run before the wet race, where he went over in the pits, didn't he, before, and just sort of gave Bagnaia the sort of the boost of confidence of, you can do this, because he'd had a few bad wet races, hadn't he? I mean, completely different now. You've got two tigers, if you like, haven't you, in the same pit garage. And Bastianini's going to that team with his sights on the World Championship. There's no doubt about it. Whereas Bagnaia is clearly the reigning champion and the man to beat. So let's see how that goes. I think it could be pretty exciting. We saw some great battles between them last year. Clean, in fairness. Obviously quite tense at times, given what could have happened if it had gone wrong. But it's going to be, I think that's certainly one for me to watch out for and look forward to this year.
Fair enough.
Second one for me, starting off at Portugal. I think that's a great shout. Qatar, we'd all done that, and we all got cheesed off with Qatar, going to Qatar. It wasn't a great start to the year, really. Your time zone was out. It was at night time. It's in the middle of a desert. It was always, I can understand why they want to go to Qatar, because of the amount of money that the Qataris obviously paid to be there. But great to be going to Portimao, the first track of the year. I mean, what a way to start a Grand Prix season on a proper motorbike track. And in Portugal as well at that time of the year, it could be cool, but we'll wait and see. But I think Portimao is definitely a better start to the season than Qatar, personally.
I think so. I'd agree with that as well.
For my next one, then I'd go for Honda. I think all these changes that we're seeing, Joan Mir coming in, Alex Rins potentially their old technical manager coming in. I mean, if that proves true and Ken Kawachi comes across, that's a massive boost for Mir and Rins to have the guy that they've been working with for the past few years who knows exactly how they like a motorbike. And we know the Honda is a bit difficult at the moment. To have him come across in charge and be tuning that bike for them. And that's before we can get to Marc Marquez. You know, Marc now, hopefully he's got this movement back in his arm. He was still a bit raw and fresh, wasn't he, at the end of last year? But he was doing better. Now he's had a winter to recover, build the strength. What's Marc going to do? Is he going to come out? You know, everyone's looking to Quartararo and Bagnaia, these guys. You know, is Marc going to come out and just shock them all again? He could do, couldn't he? We know how fast he is. So I would just go with Honda in general on that. I think there's so many storylines there.
It's a good shout. And Mark and Alex, his brother, have been out at Aragon on 600s, haven't they? Been on Supersport bikes at 600s just last week. So they're proper taking it seriously regarding that. My third one then, sprint races. I was a bit kind of skeptical originally I don't need you. I'm a bit too long in the tooth and a bit of a traditionalist with regard to some things. But I thought about it, and I think it's a good idea. I'm looking forward to sprint races on a Saturday. It's going to be hard from a team perspective, and perhaps that's what probably had my cynical view right up originally, because of the amount of work these guys are doing behind the scenes. I mean, you can't appreciate just how hard they all work and the hours they do and the travel this year they've got to do as well. That's the other point. You look at the travel sequence, and it's going to be, they're all going to be knackered. But I'm looking forward to sprint races. I think it's going to add a dynamic to it. It's not just for the show. They're proper races. Okay, they're shorter, but they are going to be intense. Not going to worry about tyres. You're not going to worry about tyre degradation. It's going to be an absolute balls out, flat out race from lights to flag. And I'm looking forward to it.
But it won't be a Grand Prix win.
Yeah.
Not yet.
Not yet. You think that'll change?
Yeah.
That's the only thing I don't agree with. You know, if you're up against the world contenders and it's world championship points, still a Grand Prix. But I suppose from a marketing point of view, I mean, didn't you have that in Formula One where we couldn't quite make out what the one race was compared with another race? You weren't allowed to call it something.
Yeah, well, because F1 did it so...
I still don't understand the World Superbike, Super Pole, and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
I still don't get it. It's never been explained to me properly.
That's the danger I find, right? All this may be great for entertainment, maybe, but does it, you know? And I'm not just saying a MotoGP exclusive. It's the same for F1, and as you say, World Superbike. Does it then alienate some people because it saturates it? It becomes a bit more difficult to understand what's what. Like in the F1 example is, you know, they were getting pole position, but that wasn't pole position. It wasn't a win. They were getting pole, but could you call it pole? They weren't sure, you know.
Well, maybe if you're over 50 and you can't kind of work.
I'm just trying to look after you, Keith. That's all.
I don't know. I mean, I know. I mean, it's difficult to keep up. I try and keep all the paperwork in front of me, but it's just. I mean, you guys that don't have any paper, you just work on a
That's a lot.
screen.
I've got a bit of paper here.
The biggest problem I have nowadays. Oh, good. I'm glad to see it. The biggest problem I have nowadays is I turn up at a racetrack to do a commentary. Well, I used to, and basically, you go to the press office and you say, right, can I have the sheets for this? They're online.
They're online, yeah.
What do you mean they're online? I need when you're a commentator, you need the hard copies so you can write all the details and all the bits and pieces in it. You need to do that. You can't do that on your screen, and you can't change screen fast enough to be able to keep up with these things. And somehow the green lobby have come up with, oh no, we're not going to give you any paper. You can't possibly use paper. I mean, I've never wiped my backside on my computer screen. You do need paper for some things. You know, it's kind of like. Honestly, I don't know. I don't know when this the green lobby when it sort of common sense is still used, but we need paper.
No, you know what? Even I agree with that. I still can't. If I'm commentating, I have to write it down on a piece of paper. I have an iPad there as well, but I still need something to actually hold and write on. I still think, you know, I'm all for saving the trees, but you know, not for commentary. Pete, what's your third thing you're looking forward to?
It was going to be sprint races, but I'm going to come up with another. But what I would just like to say one more thing about the sprint races is I hope we don't end up, given, as you guys have been saying, that they're not officially going to be MotoGP wins, which is I agree with you guys. I actually think that they should be. I hope we don't end up with the sprint races deciding the championship. And what I mean by that is we end up with the champion is someone who wins a load of sprint races and maybe one or two MotoGP Sunday races, if you see what I mean, and then gets podiums or whatever else. Because, as we've said, there are a lot of points up for grabs here. And, I think it's unlikely. But as I say, 250 points, that would have put you second in the championship. So if you won every single sprint race this year, didn't even turn up on the Sunday, and it was like last season, you'd have finished second. Now, that was an unusual year. I doubt it's going to happen. But that is just my concern, is that we'll end up with sprint races, which are apparently not real races, actually deciding the championship. And we might end up with a championship battle where one guy's really good on the Saturday, the other guy is even better on the Sunday, and they don't really meet. I mean, that's also a possibility, isn't it?
You can see all of your trolls are going to be working out, well, there's a sprint race champion and a Grand Prix champion. Yes. You're almost going to have two championships going at the end of the day, and then they'll amalgamate them to give us our overall champion. Look, there's always going to be these kind of picky arguments. I kind of trying to forget about that for the time being. We are where we are. It's a good experiment. It should give us entertainment and a race entertainment on a Saturday, which is, who's arguing with that? We get an extra race. And at the end of the day, I think, maybe Grand Prix sprint or something. It's a shame that it's not. If you're scoring points towards the Grand Prix championship, then really it's a Grand Prix race. But it's a picky point, isn't it, at the end of the day? We'll see how it all works out. I think it's going to be good this year, and I don't want to be negative about it, so I'm looking forward to it, and I hope most people are.
I think it will be good, yeah. I think in the modern sports world now, the world of TikTok and Instagram and Reels and short clips, having all of these days of practice, people aren't prepared to sit through all that, are they? They want the action, and I think it balances things out. This Saturday race, I agree with everything other than it not counting as a win. That's my summary of it.
Do you know what? Did you see the old nerve? I got the twitch then for a moment when you said that. The other thing that they could do that would be very, very good from an enhancing, enjoyable part of the sport would be to allow better access for media in the paddock. These guys need to work harder. We need more access. We need. Sorry to mention Drive to Survive, because I can't remember the name of the MotoGP version of it. But what we should have is a live version of that. There should be access, should be allowed, more than it is. I think that riders and teams, there are obviously certain parts of the technical, in the garage and the like that you can't have cameras on because, gearboxes and stuff like that. It's all protected, copyright stuff and so on. But there should be NASCAR. Let's go completely left of field. NASCAR, part of their constitution is they are committed to having to give access to their drivers, their teams, and the like. And I think it makes a better program for it. Now, NASCAR is not perhaps the thoroughbred sport that the Americans think it is. From our point of view, it's not a prototype series like we have in MotoGP. But you imagine the kind of access that we could have with the riders that we need to get to speak to instantaneously, instead of scurrying off to the back of the truck or back to the motorhome in MotoGP cases. I just think that there's a gap for the digital side of things, more access to riders, to teams, than what we get at the moment. I think that should be sort of forced a little bit more on them, if you like. Everybody's going to hate me for that in the paddock. But I'm not in there anymore, so I don't mind. If
MotoGP are listening, well, just stick us three in the pit lane, and we'll just get you all the behind-the-scenes access and have a great time.
Yeah, but you're not allowed to. Allowed to. That's the whole thing. You have to make appointments through their PRs, which some it always makes me smile. Public relations, PR, they are there to facilitate the media to their team, and yet quite often all they are is doorman. Can't come in here, mate. Got the wrong trainers on. They make it harder for you rather than easier. Not all. Suzuki were an absolute standout. Tech 3, Hervé Poncharoll's daughter looked after that side of things whenever you wanted it. There are some, and I think even when you've got people like Friné that runs the Dorna media office, what a great job that lady does. She is dealing with the most miserable people in the world, MotoGP photographers to start with, and then journalists who are usually disaffected by travel or whatever it might be, and the fact they're not making any money. These guys are having a hard time, and Friné just does such a great job. I love the lady. I mean, she always helped me in the time that I was in the paddock, and you only have to ask, and nothing is too much trouble generally, as long as you're not a pain in the backside, obviously. But it just seems to me that sometimes team PR is you've got to be there at this time, and then they'll change the briefing time so that it doesn't coincide. Something else is on at the same time, or the media briefs are all at the same time, so you can't split yourself between 3 or 4 riders. It just seems to lack coordination of some kind in that side of things, and I think door stopping is not allowed. If I had a camera with me and Valentino Rossi is walking across the car park, you are not supposed to door stop him, and that PR will bloody well cut you off. You won't get another interview with him, officially, because you had the bloody temerity to go and door stop him as he walked across the car park. And yet that's the best time. I used to go to work early, get to the track early, park the car up in the car park and just lean against the fence. And you've got team personnel, you've got riders coming in early, obviously, all before they had their early, breakfast or whatever it might be at the track. And you got conversation with them for commentary, and it's gold, obviously. But I didn't need a camera with me at that point, and no one else knew about that. It only came out in commentary during the broadcast. But I think that kind of stuff, within reason. I mean, you can't have a dozen bloody film crews all bloody lining up to get someone out when they get out their car. It'd be a pain. But there should be more access. I think the public deserve more of that kind of candid, off the wall stuff.
And this is where. This is where this whole furore, if you like, about the shakedown test comes in, isn't it, Keith? Where suddenly it's completely closed. It's a weird one, the shakedown test, because you've got all of the manufacturers there with all of their new bikes, and officially, if there was anyone with concessions, they could go there as well. So in the past, there's been Aprilia, KTM, Suzuki. Obviously, no one's got concessions now, so they're not there. But rookies as well, so it would be Augusto Fernandez, and yet all of the media and presumably any fans are completely locked out of it, even though it's only 2 days before an official test at exactly the same track with all of the paddock there. And
I'll tell you what,
I've been to about 10 of these shakedown tests, and they've been getting gradually worse in terms of the access. In terms of people, you get told you can't go into pit lane, you can't go out of the paddock, you can't leave the media room. It's been getting worse and worse and worse. But now it seems there's been just a complete freeze on anything, and you're not allowed even in the paddock. I mean, incredible. And the trouble is that, as Keith said earlier, people have booked flights, they booked hotels, they booked hire cars, already, and now they don't need them. And this whole thing of access, I mean, it's the perfect springboard into the season. We haven't had any bikes on track for 3 months. And it's a nice way to build up, isn't it? You haven't got the official stars, sure, but you've got the new bikes, and it gets MotoGP in the news. It gets fans if they're allowed in, because I think first day is a Sunday. Kuala Lumpur is an hour up the road. Let people drive down, go to the grandstand for free, take some pictures on their phones, watch an hour or two of testing, go back home. It just gets that everything going. But this is where, to be honest, it's a shame that Dorna don't run that test and just go, look, you can't lock people out like this. You've got to let people in. You can't have, I mean, the secrecy argument would be ridiculous because all of the manufacturers are next to each other in pit lane.
And you've got 2 days before you're going to have the proper test. I'll tell you what, it sounds like a challenge to me. It comes back to what I said, access. Suddenly they're denying access, and as soon as you do that, it's like an undemocratic type situation. I don't. It's kind of ruling against us. It's like a committee have said you can't do it. But for me, it would be a challenge. Like, where's my drone? I'm going to fly my drone over Sepang, because no one can catch you when you've got a drone. If you fly it in from outside, you can do what you like. Hiding in the hedge. It reminds me of the old days. What was that guy's name? Isle of Man. Brian Kreisky. There you go. Video Vision Broadcast. Video Vision Broadcast had no rights to anything. They used to climb over the fence, shoot the hell out of it, and it went on the very early satellite television days. I can't remember the names of the programs now, but Greenlight Television, who are on the Isle of Man still, were born out of Video Vision. Dave Banion, Richard Nichols, and Rob Herdman, the 3 guys that used to work for Brian Kreisky. Fortunately, those 3 in Greenlight did it properly and gathered the licenses and the passes that they need. But back in the early Grand Prix days of television, Video Vision Broadcasting through Brian Kreisky just used to cut under fences and come over the top and shoot the hell out of it all on 2 cameras. And it used to turn up on satellite television back in the day. It was the Wild West back then for television. But why would you not actually allow... Pete, you're so bang on dead right. I mean, bearing in mind that we're not talking about a rich country here, Malaysia. It's not the poorest, but it's not the wealthiest. For someone to go in during Grand Prix weekend for 3 days, it's still quite a bit out of their wages. to give them a free day. Can you imagine on a test day? They would be full of kids, and that's the kind of thing that you really want. And in Asia, it would be so well supported. Okay, they've got to pay for the main days for racing and stuff, but it's a community thing almost, isn't it? I mean, you just would allow it. I mean, I suppose there are costs involved in it. You're going to have security, you're probably going to have policing and so on, but it just doesn't seem that access has kept up with the progress that we've made in all the other areas of MotoGP. To me.
No, I think you're both bang on. They need to redo whatever that attempt was at the Netflix Drive to Survive, because it was just, if anything, I think caused more damage. They need, because Golf has just done one with a PGA Tour that's coming out, and it's the same producers as Drive to Survive, and there's a tennis one that's just come out now, and I just think, well, just get those producers to do it for MotoGP. I mean,
well, there are some brilliant producers out there. I mean, I could name half a dozen from where I'm sat at the moment that work at Sky F1 and other places that I've worked with back in the day for the IndyCar and so on. There's some very, very good, innovative young producers who could make that work. It comes down, and I think this was the crux with ours, was budget.
They didn't want to spend the money.
If you try and cheapskate, on a production, you're going to end up with a production that looks cheap. It is absolutely the way it works. If you've not got enough editors to look through all the footage and just make the best of every single thing that you've got, every comment, just logging that stuff, hundreds and thousands of hours of footage. I mean, back in the day, when we would do a highlights program for BSB, World Superbike, Grand Prix bikes back in the 500s when I was covering those as well, you'd sit in a booth for a week scrolling through tape, as it was back then, it wasn't even bloody digital, through a tape, and wait until somebody spoke, listen to it, move to the next person, wait until and it's painstaking to make a 3-minute promo, 3 minutes, opener titles at the beginning of a program would take a really good experienced editor and a producer and maybe an assistant producer all day to make 3 minutes. So Drive to Survive is an absolute performance. I told you at the end of last year, I watched Drive to Survive. I'd never watched it before. I thought I'll watch one just to see what happens. Well, I was 6 in, and it was bloody 3 o'clock in the morning by the time I was, it was one of them. It was just infectious, and I'm thinking, bikes, are better than this. And yet we've not personalities in bikes generally. Although having said that, it's not fair because Formula One have got some personalities now, it would seem, across the board. So it's slightly better in Formula One now than it ever has been for me. But bikes have got that as in abundance. They're everywhere. You've got jokers and bloody playboys and families and everything you could possibly want to make a brilliant movie. But you have got to spend so much time and so much money getting that shortened down to an hour a week or whatever it might have been. A really difficult job, but it can be done, but it needs big money.
It does. Come on, MotoGP, get it together. Let's do it. Let's
get your hand in your pocket, Harry.
Maybe Crash can fund it. I don't know. we'll get on that.
No,
I don't think so. But we're sort of approaching the end of the show, but I want to talk a little bit, Pete, about the front ride height devices. Just because, I mean, we mentioned it in the last show, which was about a month ago. And I think we were talking about how they were probably going to go. That has now officially happened, but it seemed like there was quite it wasn't as straightforward. Not every team wanted it to happen.
No, obviously there's one very obvious.
I wonder who they were.
So all of these technical things, and Keith explains before, they get discussed in the Manufacturers Association. That's where technical stuff gets thrashed out by and large. Now, you don't often get to hear exactly, obviously, what goes on inside that. But we'd heard rumours that, this ride height thing was causing a bit of a rift, to put it mildly, between the manufacturers. And then we got this announcement, I think it was on the eve of the Qatar opener last year, that these front ride height devices would be banned for the following season. Now, as you say, I spoke to Corrado Ceccanelli, the Director of Technology, to just find out the background to this, because the manufacturers made clear that it was a proposal from Dorna's side that they then were discussing, And that's what they eventually passed, if you like, as far as ban the front, leave the rear, but give 1 season before you ban the front, if you like. Now, the idea of that was to give Ducati a bit of time to benefit from it. Now, as Corrado Cecchinelli said, when they tabled it, nobody had raced with the front ride height device, and they were trying to get ahead of the curve, if you like. Now, it turned out then that Ducati already had this system in development. We saw it at the Sepang test last year in the hands of the Pramac guys and things like that. So that was where they were unhappy, because they were obviously putting time and effort into this, and then they find that it's leaving. So they were given a year, in which to sort of make something of it, if you like, get something back from their work. But it never really, as you saw, it never really caught on. I mean, Bagnaia won the World Championship without it. The Pramac guys kept developing it, Zarco particularly, but even, as time went on and you knew that it was banned from next season, there wasn't really much point in him pursuing it that much either. So yeah, it's one of those things that's caused controversy because it was legal. It was a legal loophole, and that's what Ducati are not happy about. But all of these things, and I think, again, Keith's mentioned this before, all these ride height devices, they're not what the sport wanted when they drew up the technical rules, if you like. And so you've got this compromise that Cecchinelli was explaining between, you're trying to give the clever people the benefit for coming up with something that's legal. And you see this in Formula One a lot, I think, from what I read on Crash. But at the same time, this is not an area that anyone wanted the sport to go into. Now, the reason why is that if you were going to build a ride height device, you do it electronically. That's what you would use on a road bike, for example. That would be the road relevance side. But that's banned in MotoGP. And so by banning it electronically, the assumption was that it wouldn't happen. Now, what Ducati did very cleverly was come up with a system that doesn't use electronics. And so that's why it's legal. And it works, and it obviously helps with performance. But at some stage, the rule makers have got to rein it in, really, because it's not something it's not an area they wanted to go into. So that's the difficulty here, isn't it?
It comes down to safety at the end of the day. At the end of the day, the velocity at which you're approaching and accelerating out of corners and so on and so forth is now so high that suddenly the distance between the edge of the track and the barrier is too close for the velocity that some of these motorbikes are going at. Now, you can adjust a bit of that with tyres, obviously, but I don't understand why they didn't just ban ride height. Everything. We don't need it. It's not something that's going to take us anywhere particularly. Why didn't they just ban front and rear? Let's go back to normal. It means that you can't get off the corner quite as lively as you perhaps would to sit it down. You can't get into turn one quite as fast as you would do from the start line because you can't get off the line quite as quick. It'll have that leveling factor to some extent. And of course, you lose a whole load of cost, because developing that each and every year to its finest degree takes money and time. So I don't understand why they didn't ban the whole thing. But again, it comes down to what you say. The Manufacturers Association have got to agree unanimously, which comes back down to something I said last year in one of our podcasts, was the fact is that they shouldn't have a unanimous situation. What you should have is a deciding group, if you like, and Dorna or somebody from IRTA, or both in actual fact, should be on that board of decision makers regarding the rules. I mean, self-policing is quite true. We had all this furore with the Ducati Scoop. Is it an aero thing or is it a tyre cooling device? Of course it was an aero thing that also acted as a tyre cooling device. Yamaha were all up in arms about it, and I think Aprilia were more than anybody, but I think that Yamaha had got a scoop on the back already, but it was a rain deflector that they used it for. They hadn't developed it into what Ducati did. Ducati obviously took a look at Yamaha and thought, we can modify that to work a bit better. You're always going to be in a position where clever people are going to come up with a slight loophole or a way around a rule. And like in Formula One, as you said, Pete, that they've allowed Ducati to have that for the year because otherwise you're penalising innovation within the rules. And I think that's a bad thing. But I think sometimes you have to look at what's best for the sport. As these motorbikes get faster out of a corner and deeper into a corner, or more velocity through the apex of a corner, you're going to end up with a situation where the barriers then become too close and places suddenly then become more dangerous as a racetrack point of view. It's a real difficult balance for organisers, promoters, and of course the teams because you don't want to stifle innovation, but you still need to keep it within the boundaries of where we're racing and where we're going track wise. Does that make any sense? It's a bit of a ramble. I feel like I contradicted myself about 6 times during that last few words.
No, I stopped listening.
Thanks, Harry. Now you know how we feel.
God, Pete, save the day.
It was interesting at Aragon, there was a technical press conference. Obviously, the technical bosses were all together there, and they were asked about this, and you could see the visible differences between them on this subject. And the big question that is hard to really answer is: should MotoGP follow things that are road relevance? Now, Formula One, look at a Formula One car. I mean, where's the road relevance in that? But this is quite for the teams in MotoGP. It came up amongst most of those that opposed the front ride height device, and indeed the rear. A lot of them. The reason is that they don't see any road relevance in it for the reasons that we've said. You do it differently. You do it electronically. So there's, But on the other hand, you've got seamless gearboxes, which is, as someone else pointed out, that Honda, came in with them in MotoGP, another loophole. And they're not being used, obviously, in road bikes at the moment. They're way too expensive. Carbon brakes, slick tyres. But, how much does that matter? How much do you base it on? Well, can we put this on a road bike or not? This seems to be the thing where there was no, there's no answer to it. There's no clear answer. But it seems to be for Honda, I think Honda, Suzuki, pretty much Aprilia, KTM, they all raised that point in terms of the ride height, that for them, that's a big factor. Let's say is there a future in this technology on the road bikes? Now, Ducati pointed out, never say never. Now look at the wings. The wings are already being seen on road bikes, and there is a safety issue there. I mean, it's amazing, isn't it, that motorbikes have been fired through the air at 300 kilometers an hour for decades, and no one thought about downforce or let's say the need to try and control the aerodynamics more in that way. Now that they've seen the possibilities, people seem to acknowledge that it is a lot safer. Certainly the riders, they say, I'm quite happy that I've got front downforce that keeps my front wheel on the track. At times when they are doing these amazing speeds and in difficult conditions, crosswinds, whatever else. So it's a really difficult one. Honda was quite interesting. They went, well, okay, we don't have the seamless gearbox, obviously, on road bikes, but we've learned a lot from it, from the control of the gearbox, the electronic side that we do apply. So then it gets even murkier, doesn't it, where you can apply bits of the knowledge and other bits you can't. But that's, I think, the fundamental question that MotoGP battles with quite a lot with these innovations is there a production future in this or not? Because that helps with budgets, doesn't it?
I think the budget is the big problem, isn't it? I think that's, you if you don't have some kind of cost cap going on. I mean, a prototype series is a prototype series. MotoGP is a prototype series. You made the analogy back to Formula One, and yeah, you're right. And you've either got to have a bit of an attitude that prototypes do what they do, and we end up with technical innovation, and some will get ahead of everyone else at one point, and then it will be leapfrogged and so on. And that kind of competition benefits everyone in an engineering situation. But if you don't have a cost cap, I mean, go back to the days of 6-cylinder 125s or whatever it was, 250s, with a power band of 1,000 RPM or something, and God knows how many gears to try and cope with that. I mean, the cost of producing motorbikes in prototypes like that is so huge. You wouldn't have a sport in the end. It would be one manufacturer who could afford to spend the millions and millions and millions that you would need to spend to get the best motorbike out of it. So the rule book has several functions, doesn't it? Obviously, it allows technical innovation to be promoted, but it also has an effect of putting a cap on how much money you can spend to get somewhere. And that balance is just a nightmare, which is why I contradicted myself about half a dozen times a minute ago, because personally, prototype series, you should be able to do whatever you want to do. But realistically, things like ride height adjusters and stuff like that, you've got to say to yourself, who's that benefiting in the long run? Even if you operate only, you're right in what Ducati said, never say never, because you don't know what innovation they're going to come up with for a road bike, and it might be a game changer on the road. An electronic device, when you gas the thing up and it doesn't spin the rear wheel out of control. I mean, we're talking about bloody powerful motorbikes on the road nowadays, and conditions that really can't cope with them perhaps as well as they could 20 or 30 years ago, when we didn't have dirty great holes in every inch of the road. So you never know. Are aerodynamics really a thing on a road bike? I mean, I would say it's more of an aesthetic, to be honest, for most people. Most people aren't going to feel anything aerodynamically because within the speed limit, which is about bottom gear on a MotoGP bike, you know, you ain't going to feel anything at that speed because the aero going over the wing is not enough. You're only going to be getting it at sort of 100 mile an hour plus. So at the end of the day, there ain't no road bikes that are supposed to be doing 100 mile an hour plus, even though we've got road bikes that are well capable of, 180 mile an hour without trying too hard. So there's a whole load of issues that politically you've got to work out as well as technically, and then budgetary. I mean, who'd sit on that bloody manufacturer's bench? Not me. I'm just going to shout from the sidelines.
The short answer, Harry, as far as banning the ride height device, is just to come back to your original question, is it sounds like they will try to get rid of them at the end of this 5-year contract.
Right, okay.
So that started last year. We've talked about it a lot, haven't we, because Suzuki ripped theirs up. But they normally try to keep the rules stable within that 5-year contract. So it sounds like when the next one starts, which will be 2027, I think, that's when we'll see, well, it won't only be the ride height device. We might see some bigger changes. What will the engines be like? This is where the organisers, everybody has to try and look in their crystal ball and decide what's the future of the sport, what's the future of the industry in 5-10 years, and then write the rules to fit around that. Really difficult, isn't it? But that's part of the game. And as Shakedown said, the earlier you do it, the more radical you can be, if you like. You've got to give people warning, in other words.
It don't get any more radical than Suzuki, though, does it? And that is the crux of the whole thing. Suzuki look forward as to where motorcycling is going and where their racing department fits in that, and they pulled the plug.
And that was very sad indeed. Well, look, let us know your thoughts. Do you think MotoGP should be following road relevance, or do you think it should be outright pursuant of all things prototype and be the fastest and the very best and the elite of what motorcycling and motorcycle racing has to offer? Let us know. But that's it. We're done for our January episode. Nice to be back for a little bit. Make sure you tuned in across crash.net for all the latest news and analysis, as always, across the week. And we shall be back on the 1st of February, I believe. And then we're back up and running as normal. So one a week, 1st of Feb. So we'll have all the testing, shakedown, nonsense, straight into round one and previewing and reviewing and back to normal. So get your questions in. You can voice note us now. It's podcast@crash.net. Email us your voices, and if the question's good enough, we'll get it on air. Or you can just write the old-fashioned way. Not quite Keith's old-fashioned way, but leave them in the comments section, or you can tweet, Instagram, or Facebook us. Just search Crash MotoGP. We also now have a TikTok that we're going to be used. We're getting down with the kids at TikTok. It's Crash_MotoGP. I'm not sure what we're going to be posting on there, but I think we're going to be posting clips of the podcast. So look out for that. Anyway, leave us a review wherever you get your podcast. That's really important, especially on Apple. Thank you. And we shall see you right back here on the 1st of February. Pete McLaren, Keith Huewen, thank you very much. I've been Harry Benjamin. See you next time.